Hey everyone, it's Chelsea with Savannah Wren Studio, and I know that I normally don't do back-to-back workshops, but this week I'm going to be doing the uh, Messy Yoga Mom workshop on its regularly scheduled date, and yesterday I did the Red Moon Women's Circle workshop just as a way to make sure that I stay on schedule. I really didn't want a whole bunch of workshops and content to get backlogged because of COVID and quarantine. So, today is my regularly scheduled Messy Yoga Mom workshop, and today the topic is how anxiety and anger are connected and how they play off of each other, especially if you are a parent. And, my main goal is not only to talk about this relationship between anxiety and anger, but also to discuss the principles of ahimsa, which is non-harming kindness in the yamas, uh, which is one of the first principles of the eight-legged, eightfold path in yoga. But I also wanted to bring back up the concept of aparigraha, which is about non-attachment, looking at your expectations, your assumptions, and your attachment to those concepts when you are moving through interactions with yourself and the external world. So I thought that for this workshop that I would start out by giving a little bit of personal background as to why I thought this would be a very important and intentional workshop for my Messy Yoga Mom program. One of the things that I came to realize over the last 10, 15 years is that I personally struggle with anxiety. And not just situational anxiety, where I'm a little bit nervous about what's going on and the unknown about a situation. I have more generalized anxiety where I tend to not only be anxious and therefore stressed when it comes to situations, but also with regards to potential situations. And I tend to ruminate and overly focus on the unknown and the uncertainty of what could happen in the future. And so it's rarely about specific situations and more about general feeling and general anxiety toward a whole host of things. And this generalized anxiety tended to come up and express itself most often with regards to my children. And, for a very long time, I didn't really know why being a mom stressed me out so much and made me so anxious all the time. Now, to a lot of my friends and family, I looked like a supermom who could do all the things and didn't worry about what my kids were up to, that I just let them explore and experience life as it came while still making sure that they were safe doing that exploration. But the issue was that inside I was constantly being eaten away by anxiety. What if they fall? What if I can't get to them in time? What if they eat something that I don't know about? What if they climb something and I don't see them in time? What if they break away from me and start running to the road, which did happen on multiple occasions. And it was just this constant hamster wheel in my brain of all the anxious thoughts and intrusive thoughts around my children. Now, those examples are specifically with regards to my children's safety. But the other side of the coin was that I was constantly anxious about what other people thought about my parenting and the behavior of my children. I I am an only child. Uh, for the most part, I don't really have too much recollection of being an out of control child or being punished by my parents very often. Um, in my recollection, I remember being basically probably a pretty relatively easy-going child. Now, my parents might dispute this, and they're more than welcome to drop a message into the comments about if I'm remembering my childhood um, too idealistically. But it's one of those things that I don't remember my parents having to tell me too often how to behave. They might tell me once and then I did it and I followed through. But one of my major anxieties as a parent for the last 11 years has been that I and my husband have been raising extremely independent girls who do not act like the stereotypical girl, or even the stereotypical easygoing, well-behaved, mannered children that I see a lot going on with my friends and, in TV and other media outlets. My children are wild. They are mostly feral. I have never been able to get them to wear outfits that, you know, that other people would like my kids to wear. I rarely try to force on them ways of looking and dressing. We struggle with manners a lot of times. They are extremely loud and they are extremely hyperactive. They are obstinate. They talk back on, multiple times a day. And that's not what I expected when it came to parenthood. I was expecting to have children more like myself, more, a little bit more introverted, loves to read, does like to be outside, very athletic, that liked alone time, things like that. And instead, I have children that are basically the opposite of my expectations. And so when my expectations of parenthood and my children's behavior don't match reality, my anxiety level spikes to the point that I become overwhelmed with the anxiety and I may or may not snap or become irritable, or in extreme cases become frustrated and angry to the point of yelling. And that going into that cycle of extreme anxiety followed by frustration and anger, it invariably leads to shame. I feel like I'm not good enough as a parent. I'm not good enough as an educator for my children. I'm not interacting with them enough, or I'm not interacting with them the way that I should. There's that word again that we discussed and mentioned last month, the idea of shoulding all over oneself can lead to shame and feelings of guilt and even more frustration. And so, one of the things that really helped me out with my yoga training that I did 2 years ago was the idea that my interactions with my children cannot be based on these expectations or assumptions of how children should act. I need to take into account that they are their own persons. They are human beings that are learning and growing and changing constantly. And yes, I can have, some expectations with regards to manners, thank yous, being, trying to be a little bit more polite, asking for what they would like, rather than demanding. But I can't impose upon them my expectations of what childhood should be, or how I assume children should act. I have to work through that, look at my attachments to these expectations and assumptions to be more mindful as a parent that is going to make mistakes, but who is trying their hardest to be a parent to for very intense, sensitive, and active children. So I I try my hardest to really focus on the two yamas of yogic philosophy that apply to my daily life almost every single day. And that's the ahimsa and the aparigraha, which, one is the kindness aspect, trying to avoid as much harm as I have control over. And then the other one is looking into my attachments to outcomes and expectations. And, of the yamas, these tend to be the two that I try to incorporate into my daily life as much as possible. It you know, it doesn't always happen. It is a constant battle to be aware and mindful about my behavior toward my children, how we're interacting, and am I doing it in a positive and gentle way that aligns with the type of person that I am. I am a big advocate for gentle parenting or positive discipline, and so when I am not able to focus on that, and I become less mindful of how I'm interacting with my children for whatever reason, whether it's physical health or mental health or emotional health. It adds to the level of shame and guilt that I feel when I'm not perfect as a parent. I'm not going to tell you that there is a perfect parent out there, living or dead, but and there's no perfect way to parent children, but there is this core belief within myself that I should try my hardest to be a good parent. And so when I fall off those expectations and assumptions, I can feel incredibly guilty and shameful for that, despite the fact that I know that there is no such thing as a perfect parent, and I will never be a perfect parent because that just doesn't exist. And so what I really wanted to focus on discussing today was ways to help work through your anxiety, ways specifically that help me in the moment, as well as tips for working through anger and frustration if you reach that point that you become overwhelmed by anxiety, and it shifts toward more frustration and anger. The thing that I wanted to mention is that anger is not always a bad thing. I'm not going to tell you that anger is a horrible emotion and that we need to repress it and suppress it and get rid of it. Anger has potential to be healing and to be constructive. Anger is just a messenger, and it's a messenger that is there to immediately bring our attention to something that is not aligning with our expectations, our assumptions, and our judgments about an outcome. And so if we lean into mindfulness around our emotions, then we can figure out, well, where is this anger coming from? What is the root of it? Is it anxiety? Is it an attachment to what we expected the outcome to be? Is it based on external forces that we have assumptions and expectations for how we are treated by other people? And so therefore we have anger at being treated a certain way. So, I read in this book, and I'm going to show you the book just in case you ever want to read it. I read in a book recently that it's not anger that is the destructive force or the negative aspect of the emotions. What makes anger upsetting and destructive is what we choose to do with our anger. Do we use it for constructive purposes, to take action, to call for change, or to stand up for our boundaries, or do we use the anger to lash out and hurt others for hurting us, or using that anger as a tool to cause harm. And so it's not the anger itself that is the issue. It's how we use the anger that we have to be aware of and be mindful of. So really quick, I wanted to show you this book. So hopefully you'll be able to read it. So this is a series called Unfuck Your Blank. And there's a whole bunch of different kinds. There's Unfuck Your Mind, or Unfuck Your Brain, Unfuck Your Boundaries, Consent, Intimacy, Your Worth as a person. And I recently just got finished reading this one, which is Unfuck Your Anger, Using Science to Understand Frustration, Rage, and Forgiveness. And so all of these books, they're all relatively short, and they're jam-packed full of psychological principles and coping skills to help in a variety of instances and situations. And they're all written by Faith Harper, and you can find them on Amazon should you want to purchase them. They range between $4 and $16, give or take, depending on the title. Or you can check them out from the library, Interlibrary loan them. I checked out about 4 in the series from our Kansas City Metro library, the Mid-Continent Public Library. So they're really great books, and they're written in such a way that they are straightforward. They cut through a lot of the psychological jargon, if you will, to make it cohesive and condensed so that you can easily pick out the concepts and the themes so that you don't have to read a 500-page book. You can get the principles fairly quickly in, this book is 120 pages long. So I really like that series, and I really like the author. And, the book itself, is focused on, how anger can mask a lot of different types of disorder within ourselves, mentally and emotionally. Things such as depression and anxiety, bipolar disorder, trauma is a big part of that book, and especially that entire series. She speaks a lot to trauma and how it impacts a wide variety of areas in your life. So before I end, I've talked a lot about anxiety and anger, and I've given you a lot of information about how I experienced it, being overwhelmed, being frustrated, having emotional meltdowns as an adult, having, becoming so overwhelmed and frustrated with anxiety that I would lash out and yell at my children, whether it was to, pick up the food in the living room that's been sitting out for hours, or their toys, or yelling with regards to helping with the laundry, in chores, things like that. In reality, it's just all about the anxiety that I feel and the frustration that I feel that I don't have a lot of control that I would like to have. And that's one of the issues that I deal with due to anxiety, um, as well as the other mental struggles that I've had as a parent over the last few years. Last 12 years, give or take. Um, and so the whole purpose of Messy Yoga Mom is to give you some ideas for ways to take yoga off the mat and into your daily life, especially help in messy situations, because we're all messy people, and I'm not going to tell you to put yoga on this pedestal that it's going to fix everything and everything's going to be perfect. Instead, I just want to show you that in messy situations and as messy people, yoga can be a anchor in the storm and can be used in a variety of situations to give you tools to figure things out, especially if you're a parent. So the one of the things that I advocate as a yoga instructor is finding ways to embody your emotions. I've talked about it in other workshops and in other videos, but the idea of embodiment is that you say, I feel blank. How can I constructively express that emotion to give me a moment to pause and look for what's going on within my body and within my mind before I act? Embodiment is a great tool to pause a situation and allow you to regain control in many ways. So for instance, when I become anxious and overwhelmed with anxiety, if I'm able to catch it and able to give myself that pause, I will take a yoga pose that reminds me of anxiety, and I will hold that pose for 5 to 10 breaths, maybe longer, depending on how anxious I am. And while I'm working to calm down my nervous system, I am also looking for what triggered that anxiety or whatever emotion I'm working on. Um, so, for instance, with anxiety, I might do some sort of back bend. That is a very um, anxious pose for me, especially camel or an extended back bend in mountain pose, like an exalted mountain pose, where I'm leaning back and I feel the tension in my torso, and I'm anxious about bending too far or falling over. Balance pose, like Warrior 3, can also be an anxious pose for me. And I'll hold that pose, taking deep breaths as I do. And after I've started to calm my nervous system down and I'm regaining control over myself and my emotions, and I've ridden out that wave of emotions, then I can start working on, why did I feel anxious? What, was it the, seeing all the toys spread out across the floor? Was it the dirty dishes? Was it deadlines that I thought I needed to be working on instead of doing this or that? Is it, feeling like the kids aren't helping enough with chores, or that I'm anxious because there's too much clutter? And I can do the same thing with frustration, where I'm holding mountain pose and my hands are on either side of my jawline to say I've had it up to here, and working through, why am I frustrated? What is the root of this frustration? And I can do that with anger as well, where I'm holding, angry fists, um, in goddess pose, or any of the warrior poses, to feel that anger within me. And it just gives me that break and that pause to allow me a few moments to ride out the emotional wave, which is one of the biggest coping skills that a lot of therapists focus on. They will try to give you different types of skills that allow you to insert a pause before you react or you take action. This might be counting or taking 5 breaths, removing yourself from the situation and coming back once you have ridden out that wave. And all of those work really well for not only anxiety, but for frustration and anger. Um, if I'm unable to do the yoga poses to embody my emotions, maybe I'm not fully aware of what emotions I'm feeling. I'm just kind of stuck in that emotional wave, and I'm struggling to get my head above water. I will do things such as, counting backwards from 10, or taking a number of breaths where I'm breathing deeply and just working on, pardon me, working on focusing on my breath rather than what I am experiencing. And it's just a way to get into my body and be present and be mindful of what I am physically experiencing, whether it is focusing on my breath, focusing on my heartbeat, or sensations within my body. It's all there to pause the moment so that you can ride out that wave. And not only do I do this with myself, but there's a lot of times that I try really hard, and my husband tries really hard, to use these principles with our children. So say that one of my younger kids is having an emotional meltdown where they are very upset. They are not, they're in that emotional crest of the wave, and they are unable to pause and gain control of themselves and regulate themselves without help. My husband and I will try our hardest to step in and make sure that they're safe, that they're secure, that we can generate some sort of emotional connection with them and remind them to breathe and slow down and work on diffusing those emotions so that we can then have emotional um, a regulated conversation where both us and them are in control of our thoughts to the point that we're actually able to discuss what's going on. A lot of times this will happen, especially with my um, one of my older twins and her two younger sisters, where they I don't know what it is, but they tend to fight like cats and dogs, especially when it comes to video games and what we're watching on TV. And so the three of them will play off of each other and continue to escalate and instigate emotional responses until everyone is upset and wanting to lash out and wanting to do, you know, wanting to attack, and they're angry and they're frustrated. And so a lot of times my husband and I will, sit them all down, work on their breathing, work on recentering and grounding themselves, focusing on that emotional regulation so that then we can have that conversation about why everyone was upset, why everyone was frustrated, and how we could handle the situation in the future should it crop up again. Now, I'm not going to tell you that it works every time and that my husband and I are do this perfectly every time, but we try, and that's really all you can do as a parent is try your best in the moment, in the situation. Try to be mindful and work through your emotions while helping your children work through their emotions. And there's so many ways that you can do it, but it really comes down to mindfulness, grounding, and allowing everyone to feel and express their emotions in a safe and constructive way. And the more that we feel like things are out of our control, and the more we feel like things are not lining up with our expectations and our assumptions, and the more that we are attached to those assumptions and expectations, the more that we will struggle and the more that we will suffer in the long run. And so keeping in mind the principles of non-harming, reducing our harm footprint, and being aware of our attachment to outcomes can make all the difference between the emotions that we feel and how we express those emotions. It's okay to feel anxious. It is okay to be angry. It is okay to be frustrated. It's what we do with those emotions that makes all the difference. So I hope you find something that resonates with you from this workshop today. My next workshops will be back on our regular schedule with Red Moon Women's Circle in April, And I believe it's about finding your community and establishing your support network. And then that should be around April 11th. I'll have to double check. But then we will have our regularly scheduled Messy Yoga Mom the last Sunday of April. So until then, I hope you have a great rest of your day and that your week looks bright. Even if it is only one star in the sky, that's still one more star than total darkness. And as always, the light and the darkness within me recognizes and honors the light and the darkness within you. Thank you so much for joining me, friends. I hope you have a great rest of your day.